I'll open up the April 17th DRB meeting to order. First is agenda changes.
Yes, just for another business. There was a minor site plan amendment that was approved by the zoning administrator. I think board may want to just confirm it, discuss it in other business.
Okay.
Mitch, I'm having trouble not hearing you, but hearing you sensibly.
Okay.
I actually didn't understand a word you said.
I'll repeat that. Basically, for other business, the zoning administrator, all right, this is good, I'm
That's
testing
better if
it
you
out.
back away just a little bit.
All right. The zoning administrator approved a minor site amendment that you may just want to just confirm or discuss. I just thought it might be good in other business just to bring it up.
All right. If everybody can review the minutes of April 3rd.
I wasn't here for the last meeting, so if any alternate was here that partook and wants to speak up for the minutes, or what might be.
They look fine to me. Move to approve.
I'll second that.
Any more discussion?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Sir.
Aye.
Abstain.
So, Dennis, on this next application, it's my understanding Rolf may have recused himself.
Are we doing Green Mountain Solar right now?
Oh, yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Never mind.
You may have.
All right. Up next is Green Mountain Solar for a sign review.
You know, everyone's here to hear you talk about your sign.
I know, I was really impressed. It's quite a turnout.
So just give us a brief description of what you're doing.
Yeah, so we recently signed a lease for an office in the Aubuchon or Firehouse Plaza, the end unit with the old doctor's office. So we are looking to put a sign up to flag our business. So we're proposing to put a sign right above the door where the previous sign was. As specified in the plans, it's about a 6-foot tall sign, 61-inch tall sign, 102 inches wide, so 43 square feet. And it's basically just our logo. It's going to be printed on a metal background with a wood frame to it. And we're not changing the lighting from the lighting that was previously there. It's still working and functional, so we'll just repoint it to make sure it hits the sign correctly and minimizes spillage.
Okay.
And how's the illumination going to work?
So there's currently existing in the prior picture, you can see where the two lights were. Those two halogen or LED floods are there. So they're pointing up directly. We'll just keep the same pointing so that it hits the sign and hopefully doesn't spill much beyond that area. We have the lights on a switch inside, so we'll just operate them within business hours. When people leave for the night, we'll shut them down.
And what time would you expect it to be?
Our typical office hours are going to be between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m.
So maybe for an hour in the winter, you'll have some light on there.
Yeah, on the darkest days, maybe an hour and a half.
2 or 3.
Board members have any other questions?
I guess when you put it that way, it's not going to be lit up that long. It kind of dampens, I guess, a little bit my concerns. I'm not crazy about the lights pointing upwards. It runs counter to all of our lighting ordinances where they're supposed to be downcast. I guess when I was looking at the sign, particularly, it's a white face sign, so I mean, it will be reflecting. Even if you put the lights on the sign, it's still going to be reflecting up into the sky, which is something we try not to do. I guess I was kind of hesitant to approve, based on that. because it just seems like there's, with LED lighting, lighting strips that you can put across the top of the sign, there's alternatives for not doing the upcast lighting. And I know 6 other people in that same building have the same lighting structure.
Yeah, as a small business, I just was trying to keep costs down, so using existing lighting is a large benefit. To add another lighting to the sign would be, I don't want to say prohibitively expensive, but it would be tough.
Is there a way to change that orientation, that the 2 lights with the bar along the bottom? Would it be possible just to basically extend the conduit to the top and then just turn the lights down so you reuse the existing hardware?
I would have to check with the landlord on that if we can make that. That's an extensive change that he would need to approve on the building. It's a metal conduit that's running there right now, so it would also take a bit of work to do.
Okay, that was my only concern.
Yeah, our goal is to minimize the use of the lighting within the existing business hours, and so.
Okay. Anybody here from the public? Well, we have a draft decision.
I've read the decision, and I would move to approve as written.
I second. I agree. The lighting system in the plaza might be improved going forward, but this is nothing worse than is there now. So I second it.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 I'll go as opposed.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, up next is Martin Foods of South Burlington, subdivision revision of the Commerce Park.
So Dennis, the point I wanted to raise, is my understanding Rolf may have recused himself from this?
Yes, he did.
I think it's important that we just have a continuous board, so obviously, everybody has to understand if you miss a meeting, you gotta review the materials, to participate, but I think it's important that we just have a coherent board, throughout these proceedings.
Okay.
Agreed.
All right, well, the staff would like to take 5 minutes to do a little overview.
Yeah, and I won't take 5 minutes, it'll be less than that, I hope. So there are 2 applications in front of the board. One is a subdivision revision to revise the 1986 approval of the Commerce Park subdivision. The board's going to take that up first. The second is a site plan application for the supermarket, and the board's going to take that up second. I think everyone in this room is aware of the history. I don't think I see any new faces, actually, but just to reiterate, this project was initially applied for in 2010, and the board reviewed it through 2011 and 12, reaching decisions in 2012. Those decisions were appealed, at least some of them were, and they had been in the court systems for many years. It went all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court, at least on the site plan, the original site plan approval, and the Supreme Court reversed that approval, and that's why the applicant is back here. It's a little more nuanced than that, but that's the short story. So that's the basic history. And again, what we're doing tonight is to begin with the subdivision application, then the site plan application, and if we have time for the site plan application, which our chair is going to make sure we do by cutting off the subdivision discussion at a certain hour, we're going to focus only on stormwater issues. As some of you may know, there has been some disagreement between the parties as to the proper set of regulations to use to review these applications and what standards within those regulations to use. And we've sought legal counsel from independent attorney that's working for the town. He rendered one opinion in March and revised that opinion just a week ago. And so the staff report that we published and made available to folks is not comprehensive based on that new revised opinion from the town attorney. And so everything is a little in flux. With that said, both Hannaford and Jim Dumont and the citizens that he represents in opposition to the project were made aware that tonight we would be talking about the items that I just mentioned: subdivision, site plan, but only with regard to stormwater. And I believe they have expert witnesses here, and so we want to be able to get to them. So rest assured that we will be talking about this at additional meetings, and all of the other issues that are deemed relevant will be discussed. But that's the agenda for tonight, at least. Because there have been these disagreements between the attorneys principally on which set of regulations to use, what standards to use, we felt it made sense to recognize that, and before we begin the actual presentation and testimony, to give each party an opportunity to summarize their position for the board. So that's where we were going to start, and I believe Dennis will take it from here on that.
All right. Yeah, I think the first thing we'll do is we'll open it up to the lawyers to plead their case on how we will review this project. So I don't know who wants to go first. James?
Why don't I start by handing you the latest petition?
Okay.
And we'll get more names later, but that's to get started.
And there's a microphone to record for posterity.
I really don't need to add to what Alex just said, because the legal issues. I'm sorry.
He's asking people to just say the name for the record.
Sure.
So even though there are people who know
Right.
everybody,
Yep.
just repeat it.
James Dumont. And I don't have much to add to what Alex said. I don't think it'd be constructive to engage in an oral argument on the applicable legal standards right now. We've submitted our position. I know Hannaford doesn't want to comply with the subdivision regulations, which explicitly state that the current version of the state stormwater rules have to be complied with. That's what the law is. And this project cannot possibly meet the current stormwater regulations. We have 3 experts here to explain why that is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for the record, I'm David White, here representing Hannaford. I am not an attorney, but simply want to state we have provided to the town and to the board a memorandum from Chris Roy at Downs Racklin Martin, who is the attorney of record during the appeals process. That states our position. Our belief, very strongly based on case law, is that the 2009 regulations are those that apply, that we are vested in those regulations, and that the issues that are open are limited to those on which the Supreme Court did not rule, plus the subdivision question, and that's it. But we have nothing to add, and one of the rare instances where I agree with Mr. Dumont is that I don't think there's a lot to be gained by arguing the legal briefs in front of the board today. You have our position in writing, and we'll stand by that.
And that writing we got today, right? Is that?
Correct.
So Mr. Dumont submitted his written arguments or information in February. The Hannaford application narrative actually included a description of what Mr. White just described, and that we received that in January. But today we received a much lengthier explanation with a lot of legal precedent citations from Mr. Roy. So you haven't had a chance to review that yet, but it is here and was received today.
And neither is that.
Why did we do this tonight?
Well, I think that the town attorney changing his mind had something to do with the need for the applicant to provide a more nuanced document about the legal arguments in play here. Because initially, to be perfectly honest, the town attorney's opinion was in some ways similar to Hannaford's, different in others, but I'm guessing that's part of the reason why you're seeing it today and not, a month ago.
That is the reason. It's because the town attorney changed his opinion a week ago or less.
Yeah.
And
Which site plan standard applied?
Yes.
no, with respect to what criteria were open for review. And so we felt the need to reply to that. And having just received it recently, we replied as quickly as we could.
So we'll be getting the town attorney's take on this.
You could. What I'm recommending, Dennis and I spoke earlier, is that you thank the attorneys for their legal reasoning and move on to the subdivision revision and begin that process. But that you meet at your next meeting on May 1st. And if you'd like the town attorney to meet with you in closed session to discuss these procedural issues so that you could maybe come to a ruling on that before this goes all the way through the process, that we could do that then. It would give you time to read Mr. Roy's letter that just came in today.
Yeah,
and
let's kick it down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are the board members in agreement with that?
Well, were we given the town attorney's new opinion?
Yes, it should be in your
It's in the packet.
in your
It's in there
Dropbox.
for sure.
It's dated April 10th.
About a week ago.
I'm not sure we have any Dropbox yet, Mr. Dumont, which came literally I think a couple of hours ago or so. But all the information will be available in the Dropbox, as well as the Dropbox that will be available to the public. So everybody's going to have all the information.
So for clarification then, we will be discussing the subdivision because that is not pertinent to these challenges or these recent memos being issued, correct?
There are some, when you read through it, both Mr. Dumont's earlier submission in February and Mr. Roy's submission today, there are some issues that may be relevant to the subdivision review, but I don't think either of the parties dispute the fact that review is necessary.
Right.
And so I think you can proceed with the understanding that the review is necessary. And if there's disagreement about which standards within that review might apply, we can take that up at a later time. I will tell you what the town attorney told me today, having received Mr. Roy's document. He said that he stands by his April 10th opinion, but he said that both sides are making very good legal arguments, and he respects both the parties' arguments on that front. And so you ought to take the time to read through them yourself. And if you'd like to have his counsel, like I said, at your May 1st meeting, we can make that happen.
Blessedly, or perhaps not blessedly, nothing we do in the next few weeks is going to make any difference, however, because it's going to get appealed to the Superior Court, and whatever we spend our time on has no meaning, unfortunately.
That's one way to put it. We definitely have a necessary process to go through, but I think the substance of what you're saying, I think none of the parties would dispute that anything you do is going to be appealed to the next level and likely decided there.
Where there is trial de novo and anything we do has no meaning or effect.
Well, just to clarify, it is de novo, but as happened in the last proceedings, the Superior Court affirmed your decision and affirmed all of your conditions with the exception of a couple. So what you do does matter, but it's not going to stop here. I think everybody's clear on that. In any case,
So are all in agreement? May 1st?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep on rolling then. Go to the subdivision revision. The applicant can present.
So, the subdivision question is really pretty straightforward. The Supreme Court, to our surprise, ruled that the lines on the plat that was filed when the Commerce Park was originally created back in the 80s that showed the then current zoning setback lines were in fact an enforceable condition. And as a consequence of that, they said our plan didn't comply because a portion of the
Why
building...
is that a surprise?
We had been, through the entire process, I don't believe this body, when you and predecessors of those of you who weren't here at the time approved it, did not deem that to be an enforceable condition. It doesn't.
We didn't know about it.
It did not appear in any of the in the permit as a condition, and it's very typical. I'll speak from my perspective. Very typical that zoning plans will show the then current setback lines. So, be that as it may, the Supreme Court ruled that it's enforceable.
It was on the final plat, wasn't it?
It was on the final plat. So the Supreme Court ruled that it was enforceable. As a consequence, we are here to amend that. At the time, and I will refer here to what we submitted as part of our subdivision application as part of this process, if you look at the purple line, that reflects the line that was shown on the plat at the time that Commerce Park was created back in the 80s. And it reflects a 75-foot setback off the canal along here and a 30-foot setback around the perimeter. The subsequent to that time, the Hinesburg zoning regulations were amended and require a 25-foot setback from the canal, although it maintained a 75-foot setback along Patrick Brook. But along the canal, it amended it to require only a 25-foot setback, and for around the perimeter, only 10 feet. So this line, I believe it's blue, it's hard for me to tell from this distance, reflects what we are proposing, which is consistent with current zoning and is consistent with what has been in place with respect to zoning for quite a few years. And so our request is quite simple, which is to amend the subdivision to simply reflect current zoning with respect to the setback requirement.
Now, have you changed any of the setbacks anywhere else?
We are not requesting that.
This is the same, this is what you showed the last time you were here, this exact?
No, last time we were here, I don't think any of us were thinking or aware that this purple line might be enforceable. At the time, we were looking at the zoning requirements, which is reflected here by the blue line, which is again, 25 feet off the canal and 10 feet off the perimeter.
Okay.
I find it hard to believe that attorneys or engineers familiar with Vermont statutes and so forth did not have some concern about the enforceability of the plat line. I just find that astonishing, with tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, that you folks were spending on this application, that this issue had not percolated through the review process internally.
Believe me, had we been aware of it, given all the issues there were, this would have been, I think, fairly minor in the context of all the issues we reviewed over the course of 15-some hearings with this board. We would have raised it. So we were unaware of that.
I'd like to believe that.
I believe an argument was made either in your application or in the staff report that some of the other buildings in this subdivision have been built within,
Well, there was a reference to the post office specifically,
yeah, well,
which is the closest to the canal.
I'm interested in knowing what part of those, the building doesn't look like it's within the 75-foot setback, or am I dreaming? I guess the,
I'm happy to respond to that.
Sure.
If you look at section 2.5.1 of the zoning ordinance, which is relative to stream setbacks, it says that within the village growth area zoning districts of which this is one, all parking lots, and that's the key term here, and structures, including accessory structures, shall be located outside of the stream setback area. And the stream setback area at the time was 75 feet for both Patrick Brook and for the canal. Today, it's 75 feet for Patrick Brook, but only 25 feet for the canal. And if you look at that and measure either to the building or the parking, you'll find that tailhook towing is within the 75 feet along Patrick Brook, which is a natural stream versus the man-made canal. The mini storage is within 75 feet. Nestec is within 75 feet, and the post office actually is as well.
The parking lot at the post office.
Off the top of my head, I don't recall. I did measure those. I don't recall whether it was the parking lot or the building. But we've got at least those four that are, if you go and measure, are within the 75-foot setback. So if you look at those, the board has consistently approved projects that are within that setback. In our case, the building is, I believe, at its closest, which has to do with the canopy projection out from the building, about 43 feet away from the canal.
Do we have a projection, or can we get up a projection that would show your as-proposed building design in relation to the canal and, you know,
Sure,
what's
that's-
there, overhang?
I believe that's
wall
on
face,
O2.
Parking?
Yes, if you go to O2 there, you can just say okay on that. So,
I can't.
sure.
Okay.
So you've got here, this is Mechanicsville Road. This is the canal. We've got the path here, which is within the 25-foot setback. It's not just 75, it's within the 25-foot setback along here. And then we've got the main part of the building, which is outlined with this hard line. And then we have kind of dashed in, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this canopy.
Well, I can't see that. Is there any way you can enlarge that?
So it's this kind of hatched area. And so from this corner of the canopy to the canal is 43 feet. So well outside the 25-foot zoning setback requirement, which is what we designed to, whether appropriately or not.
But what, just assuming a 75-foot setback from the canal, what does that, I mean, where would that line cut across what you have there?
I don't know precisely.
Roughly.
I've not drawn that, but I would guess it would just chop the corner of the building, you know, maybe around there. So most of the intrusion within the 75 feet is the canopy and perhaps a little bit of the corner of the building.
And by canopy, you mean overhang?
Yeah, it's,
And
you know,
how
walking
much is
under
that?
the...
Refresh my recollection from
Yes.
8 years ago?
Well, we will be showing those when we get to the site plan review, but yes, this
What,
is...
roughly 6 feet or something?
So let me think about this. 30,
15, maybe.
yeah, I don't know. I do not want to guess at a distance here because I have not scaled it. I don't know.
Okay.
But again, we're simply trying to be consistent with what was approved previously by this board, albeit we were not aware of that, the 75-foot shown on the plat, perhaps we should have been, and consistent with current zoning and zoning that's been in place for many years, and consistent with other decisions that have been made by this board previously.
Okay, can you move over to the parking lot area, Mitch?
Is this the area you want?
So those are all parking spaces along the
Trees?
trees on the outside,
So this is the edge of the parking lot right here.
right? Which is how far away?
I don't know, Paul, do you have that? If I may take this moment, I neglected
Sure.
earlier to introduce our team. So we have with us Paul O'Leary, our civil engineer, Tyler Sterling from Hannaford, and Scott Jonick from Downs Racklin Martin, our law firm.
Mitch, which drawing is this?
This is, I think this is S2, I think, or,
No, it's the planting plan. It's L1.
no, it's L1, L1.
Okay.
It would be in the site plan application materials.
Got it.
Yeah.
C2 is good too.
Does any of them have a ruler?
Yeah, they do. At the bottom is a graph. C2.
FC2, all right.
You have to get out of there.
Oh, that's right, C is the
If you go to
civil.
C2. Yeah, and then it has a scale at the bottom.
Okay.
You can scale it regardless. You can get a clue from that, but.
It must be close. I mean, it's over 50, looks like, but maybe not quite 75.
So from the edge of the canal, which is here, to the edge of the parking is about 66 feet. And we did confirm, my estimate was about right, that the 75 feet just nips the corner of the main part of the building here. Most of the intrusion within 75 feet is the canopy.
And there's a patio or something on that side, is
Yeah.
that true? Just under the canopy or more than that?
Under the canopy.
Yeah.
And then there's a smaller canopy that extends along the side, and then it jumps out. What we're trying to do is to, really treat this corner particularly, but the entire side, treat this corner so that it really kind of addressed the pedestrians coming in.
So what does the canopy more to the back cover? So I see the reason for the sidewalks coming off of the path to the corner canopy, but the one further back, I assume that's not a main entrance to the building?
No, there's no entrance there. It's an architectural feature. It's possible that there'll be a picnic table or something like that under it, but it is not.
That'd be more for employee.
Yeah, that
Okay.
kind of thing. Yeah. And I've not measured it, but that may well be more than 75 feet. Paul, could you quickly double check that?
And remind me, do you have truck circulation going around behind?
We do not. Truck circulation ends here.
Okay.
It does not circulate around the building. And again, we'll get into these site plan issues. I'll describe the site plan more thoroughly when we get to that part of it.
Okay.
Paul, do you still have that, my scale there? You can. Okay.
So the question was?
How far, Mitch, if you can scroll back so we can see the canal. How far is this portion of the canopy at its closest point from the canal?
80 feet.
Okay, so that's already outside the setback.
Can I ask a clarification question? Is that the 25 feet, is that from the top of the bank or the average water line? What is that from?
Well, in the case of the canal, it's got a very solid vertical edge. So it's really from the edge of the canal, which is...
Top of the bank,
Well, it's top of bank, and as it rises and lowers, it doesn't change where that edge is.
I'll just add that regulatorily, it would be from the top of the bank.
top of the bank.
Board members have any other questions?
Well, go ahead. The other setbacks that we're looking at modifying in the subdivision, give us the context of those and whether you're in them in the current design.
So again, historically, it was a 30-foot setback. And the current zoning is a 10-foot setback. I'm not aware of being within 10 feet anywhere. I wouldn't absolutely swear to that. Paul, do you know if we're within 10 feet anywhere with parking or anything around the site?
We're right to the setback.
Okay. Because we designed it to the 10-foot setback. So we may be within the 30-foot setback. We probably are here. We may be back here.
That's what I was asking about.
Okay.
30, where
Yeah.
you are,
Yeah.
impinging
But
on the 30-foot setback.
We have designed it for the 10-foot setback.
Again, point of clarification or question is snow storage, is that allowable use outside of the setback?
Yes, our regulations only require that parking areas be 5 feet from a property line. Structures meet the setback requirement from property lines, and it's mute on snow storage.
Great.
And that's actually parking there as well, so it's just, if, when there's no snow, that would be potential parking.
Yeah. But it's within 10 feet, or it's within the
30
boundaries
feet.
that were being seen.
Yeah. So I have a question for our staff. It seems uncommon that a subdivision plat explicitly shows setbacks. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of subdivisions. I don't remember us ever requiring the plat explicitly showing a setback because the intention is that's adjustable by the town as regs change over the years. I mean, is this an uncommon thing that this particular lot of land has a setback?
I had some conversations with some former planning commission members. Planning commission at the time did the subdivisions. And what I was told by several members is that they oftentimes put in, sort of like what you do today with the building envelope, put in a, what really is a building envelope, but basically to setbacks or to take into account wetlands and so forth, wetland buffers, as guidance for the applicant so they knew where to build. And, granted, I can't speak specifically on this particular one, but that's what a number of planning commission members have told me in the past, what they did.
I think there was a site plan that was filed that showed the setbacks. There's also a plat that was filed by George Bernard. I don't believe that had the setbacks on.
Now, if you look at the plat in detail that's on file, the cover sheet shows these setbacks. If you look at the plat for the individual lots, it does not.
Well, regardless, the Supreme Court has told us that the setback is enforceable.
That's right.
Yeah, and Dick, to your question, it's very common that when we receive subdivision applications, even in the modern era, not back in the 80s, that surveyors or especially engineers will draw in the setback lines. And then we have to work with them to say, well, the board wanted a building envelope and it needed to do this. It's not just the setbacks you need to create the envelope around. It's the things that Mitch mentioned, avoid the steep slope, avoid the wetland. But in the absence of those site constraints, it's common for these projects to show the setback lines. And I'll just say that having researched the record on this, at least in our planning commission minutes, and not seeing a rationale for those lines that were shown on the plans that the Supreme Court referenced, it's quite possible that those lines were put on there because those were the setbacks at the time. I think that Mr. Dumont has some additional information to share on that when you get to public comments, but it is common to see that.
Yeah, clearly, based on the Supreme Court decision, that any of the other businesses that happen to be within that setback should have gotten a subdivision revision.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's clear.
Yeah.
But we're not reviewing those.
No, no, water over the dam, so to speak.
Or some of them may have actually applied after the regulation was changed.
I don't think so. No,
Are they that old?
I think they were all there previously, and
Okay, all right.
yeah, it got missed. I'll be honest with you, and we should do a little mea culpa here too, because it wasn't just the applicant that missed this plat or site plan that got filed. That was the reason for the Supreme Court. One of the reasons for reversing it. We missed it too as staff. We didn't see it.
So I guess, I'll let it drop, but what surprises me or kind of confuses me about it is I can understand showing them for reference, but for them to become a hard and fast, to basically overrule any future town regulation and change of setbacks, it doesn't seem like that would have been the intent for putting them in there. So, I guess we've been told they're there.
It's all well detailed, the legal reasoning behind it in the Supreme Court decision. So if you read that, they address why they're enforceable and how that parlays into future applications needing to revise them, even if the base zoning has changed, like it did.
The long and short of it is they're enforceable but not unchangeable.
Correct.
And that's why we're here.
Board members have any other questions? All right, I'll open it up to the public. If you can please come up to the table or unless you want to hand.
So it'd be great to have folks come to the table. I don't know if you wanted to recognize Mr. Dumont first, since he's representing several members of the public.
Sure.
Why don't we get kind of the witnesses done and then put on our witnesses? I think that's more constructive than me asking questions at this point.
I don't know that they have anything further. David, do you have anything further? It's all yours, Jim.
Our witnesses are here to talk about stormwater under both groups. So I don't know how you want to proceed. But why don't we, Mr. Stout is here and can respond to some of the questions Mr. George just had and some of Mr. White's presentation. So why don't we start with Mr. Stout?
Can you throw up on the screen the PDFs we sent this afternoon? And it's called Stout Old Wines, I think it's an ortho photo. Well, it won't show that way on the file anyway.
Which one is it?
He just submitted it this afternoon, so I don't know if it's in your package.
Oh. Is this in our packet?
My impression is no, since it did just come in.
Right there. Yep. Stout Old Plat.
I don't remember seeing that.
So my name's Tony Stout, senior planner at Lakeside Environmental Group in Burlington. I have been involved with this project now for several years. The question of whether or not other buildings within Commerce Park have complied with these old building setbacks from the original approvals. When I looked at the various drawings and attempted to match them up and make that determination, it appeared to my eye that all of the buildings that have been constructed in Commerce Park to date are within the setback lines that were in the original, on the original plat. There are a few areas, particularly over by Patrick Brook on the backside of some of those buildings on lots 3 through 8, where the parking lots appear to go over the line. And I believe those were some of the, I don't know if it was done through a variance or a modification to site plan at the time that those were approved. But
So
the
when you
buildings
said
are,
the buildings are within, you meant not in.
the buildings are within the building envelopes.
Okay,
that
not
were
in the setback.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then to verify that, I digitized the original plat lines, which is the yellow lines you see on this image. And then I literally scaled it and draped it over this orthophoto document, which is something the applicant had submitted several years ago, I think as part of their Act 250 application, as kind of a first test to see if I was, on target. And it certainly appears when you line up all the parcel lines and then you look at the building envelopes, they appear to be within or very close to being within. Certainly with regard to all of the setbacks to the streams and the canals, the buildings all seem to be well within those lines that I could find. The post office.
Can you shed any light on whether those structures were erected before or after the setback was reduced from 75 to 25 feet?
I believe all these buildings have been built since when the zoning was 75 feet.
Right.
I think the 25-foot setback to the canal is a relatively new thing, and there's been no new construction along the canal.
May I just clarify, the 75-foot setback still exists along Patrick Brook. It was only reduced along the canal.
Here, just hold on.
Would you like me to repeat that? For the record, if you look at the zoning, the 75-foot setback still applies along Patrick Brook. It is only along the canal that it was reduced to 25 feet. So other than the post office, every building that intrudes is along Patrick Brook and still has a 75-foot setback.
Okay, you made that point and I missed it. Sorry.
And the other thing I noticed was even the original post office building, which I believe was one of the first buildings in here, the building is set back more than 75 feet from the canal. That lot doesn't have a setback line per
You'd agree
se.
that the parking lot is within the 75 feet, though?
Yes. So all the buildings have been consistent with the original approval. And in terms of the question that Mr. Jordan asked earlier about the building envelopes, as a planner, it makes total sense that you would have building envelopes on a plat and you would expect them to be adhered to even though the zoning may change in the future, because you're oftentimes looking for consistency within the development, whether it's a residential project or a commercial one, so you get uniform building setbacks, uniform treatment, things of that sort. So it's not an unusual thing. When you start varying the setbacks over time, you end up more with what's happened up in Williston, where now you have some buildings that are set quite far back with large frontage, and you have new buildings coming in that are built right up on the sidewalk. And you get kind of an odd visual appearance that often catches people's eyes, and they go, how did that happen?
But how within our regulations can we deal with that? Hannaford's point would be, look, their application is consistent with what's here now, and that's what we as a board should be living with.
Okay, so the 25-foot setback in the zoning ordinance currently, my understanding is that came into existence at the same time that the town adopted its village growth area, and that it adopted the section in the zoning ordinance, which is incorporated by reference into the subdivision regs, that all site plan applications had to be preceded with conceptual master planning. And that's a common trade-off you see in modern planning, where you allow developers flexibility. You want to give them flexibility so they can be creative and not do silly things just because there's a number in the regulation. But the quid pro quo for that is planning, master planning. resource studies, looking at all the issues, figuring out what the appropriate buffers and setbacks should be based on the resources that are in the field, not just some arbitrary number that some body picks. So the 25 feet gives you the potential to go closer to the stream, but it doesn't mean you necessarily should. And the thing I would ask here is, where is the master planning that would precede moving this over to 25 feet? Has there been any broad-scale evaluation of this? Has there been any master planning that involves Lot 15 as well as the remainder of the Giroux property, which is all part of the same ownership? I haven't seen any documents like that. I don't think anything's included with the, either the subdivision or the site plan applications that are before you. And that's all I've got.
Setbacks, you're just talking about the stream setback. You're not talking about the setbacks, the other setbacks to boundaries.
I've been focusing only on the setbacks to the canal.
Okay.
The original one was I don't know if it was the plat called it a building setback. I don't know what the zoning at that time called it. My understanding is it was done to protect the stream.
All right, well, I'll just tell you for the record, it was actually the building setbacks, it was matching the stream setback at the time of regulations. I just wanted to clarify because I wasn't sure if you were saying just simply the canal, because there are buildings that are now built, that were built that do not meet the actual setback, but you're not talking about the other setbacks that they're talking about, you're just talking about the canal.
Mitch, what are you talking about when you say there are other structures that
No,
have been
I'm
built
talking
that
about,
don't
for
meet the
instance, the
setbacks?
National
Within the
Bank
30
of Middlebury followed the 10-foot setback, which you have in this
Okay,
area
well,
over here.
that has nothing to do with the
And I just wanted to clarify that.
or the other
Make
stream
sure that we were-
setbacks.
Right, I just wanted to make sure that we were not, because part of what you said could have been looked upon both ways, and I just wanted to make clear that what you were talking about was just the stream setback to the board.
I thought I mentioned that. That is correct. My focus was on the setback to the canal and to the stream when I was talking about that.
All right, I just wanted to clarify it.
Right. And nothing on this drawing, to be clear, is overly precise. This is a first cut at kind of looking at this to see whether it deserves further investigation, but it appears that all of the buildings have adhered to that. The setback, as it was drawn on the plat, if you go measure to the actual stream where you find it, you'll find that the stream is probably within 75 feet in places, and that's purely because of the way the plat was drawn back in 1986.
I'll tell you that
They didn't.
some of the plans, looking at some of the plans, they actually measured the stream from the center line of the stream as opposed to the banks that we do now.
Or they
But I
averaged
understand.
the meanders
Yeah.
along Patrick Brook. You see all sorts of, and so I didn't measure to the water bodies. I measured, this is the way the plat was drawn, the way it was interpreted back in 86. So, and then the other thing, Jim just reminded me, and I thought I mentioned this, but just for emphasis, our understanding, again, is that 75-foot setback from the canal and from Patrick Brook, and this was the understanding in the Act 250 process, wasn't just a building setback for a building setback's sake, like you'd have a side yard or a rear yard, but it was clearly intended as a stream buffer. That's why it's 75 feet versus, your typical rear yard might be 30 feet or something like that, if the side yard's already 30 feet.
All right. Thank you.
Right?
Do we have anybody else?
We do have witnesses to talk about stormwater.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody else?
Are you inviting comments from the public now?
I was.
Public, you can speak.
So Dennis, the confusing part about this is that you have subdivision revision application in front of you. we still have about 15 minutes according to the schedule you and I talked about. Some of the arguments that Jim Dumont is making about the subdivision revision relate to stormwater. But I think, Jim, you're saying that some of those arguments, those same arguments are valid for with regard to the site plan review. So when do we want to get into that? Do we want to get into it in the context of the subdivision revision request or the site plan application? I think that the applicant would like a chance, as a part of the site plan application, to introduce the project again and describe the overall sort of what's going on with the site and talk about stormwater. I don't know if, Jim, you'd be amenable to just proceeding to that, because I think the board is interested in, or I hope you're interested in leaving the subdivision revision application or hearing open, because these two reviews are somewhat intertwined. So
But is there
I need to make
anybody in the public who just wants to talk about what we've already talked about?
Subdivision?
I mean, just exclusively?
So we need to make a motion to continue that.
Yes, but Greg's point was, is there anyone else who wants to speak on just the subdivision? If not, then, yeah, that would be my recommendation. Continue this subdivision revision hearing to your May 15th meeting and
Right.
proceed with the site plan.
Because they're intertwined.
But I want Jim to feel comfortable with that.
I can't agree to that because I have witnesses here who are ready to testify about the subdivision standards for stormwater. For your convenience and theirs, I'm suggesting that we keep your subdivision process open. They apparently don't want their stormwater witnesses to talk about how stormwater plays out under subdivision. That's their choice. Our witnesses.
I think it's getting closed.
No, we plan on keeping it open.
Okay, because when my folks testify, I want it to be under both applications, that's all.
Everything's going to be kept open.
I think to Jim's point, it would be easy to just acknowledge that the subdivision hearing is still open for the rest of this meeting, open the site plan review at the same time. We can pat our heads and rub our bellies, and then at the conclusion of tonight, continue both
That's
to the
just
May
what I meant.
15th meeting.
Except I think there was one member.
I was trying to invite citizens of Hinesburg who have an interest in talking about.
We have one.
I think we have a couple.
Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Jeff French. I'm a member of the Hinesburg Planning Commission. And I'm not here in an official capacity or giving any testimony for the Planning Commission, but just to give some background. So one of the things that I'm interested in the Planning Commission is about design review and how the look and feel and how buildings fit. The Planning Commission, as you do know, did go to the Select Board asking about what's it called? The interim zoning to try to keep the look and feel of the thing. All the buildings in this area are 20,000 square feet and under, which I think is important. It got denied, that's fine. They're within, in my understanding, it's not my choice, but within the regulations, they're fitting the lot size. But my concern is the look and the feel and the design, and I didn't know this about the plat lines, but how they all match. It would just be unrealistic to have it different than everything else that's there, if I'm making sense. So if you've got a plat line that says that's your building envelope, and all of them are fitting in the building envelope but one building, it would be strange for a design.
Site plan, which we're going to get into.
Maybe, but for the subdivision, if you're fitting in the,
Right. The line gets established at the subdivision.
Yeah, well,
Right.
It's all going to get kept open, but
yeah, no, but you asked for a member of the public?
yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to keep the subdivision open. We're going to,
There's one hand creeping up, Dennis.
oh, we have another? Okay.
I'm John Kadash. My question is, it seems to me that there are two different setbacks or stream buffers that we're looking at. One is 25 feet, which apparently came about during a revision of the zoning standards, a recent, relatively recent revision, and a 75-foot setback or stream buffer that I understood was granted when the initial proposal for Commerce Park was submitted. Further, it's my understanding that that 75-foot buffer setback was actually part of a different authority establishing that permit than the 25-foot buffer setback that was established by the town of Hinesburg, essentially. Aren't there two different authorities over those two different stream buffers that we're talking about here? And does the town of Hinesburg have the ability to modify the 75-foot stream buffer that they were not the ones who established that legally initially?
Well, as a very quick answer, and the 75-foot buffer was part of the regulation at the time, but since the regulation has been changed, they have the right to approve, to file for an application to amend the final plat. And that's what we're here for.
So, I was thinking the reason that the town could reduce that to 25 was because it was a man-made channel as opposed to, was that part of the decision that, so, you know, is there state regulations that set 75-foot buffers, or is that totally up to the town to decide what the buffers for streams are?
These setbacks or buffers are set by the town. They're not based on the state. They're not dictated by state requirements. But I think what John is pointing out is that these original building setback limits, which is what was indicated on the original plat, were part of the subdivision approval for Commerce Park, and that's where they were set. And the reasons for why they were set, some folks say it was because that's what the regulations required at the time. Other folks say, well, it was because they wanted to have consistency across the subdivision. Other folks say it was to protect, you know, the stream and the buffer. And ultimately, the applicant is saying, we'd like to revise the subdivision plat, and that's what they're here to discuss.
Is what we're hearing. That makes the 75 feet a requirement. I think that was your question, right?
Right, and it didn't, the 75-foot setback buffer come about through an Act 250 process?
No, what's being discussed is what happened as a result of the subdivision approval at the town level, and the subdivision plat that was filed as a result of that town approval.
Was established at 75 foot.
Right.
And then later,
there may be
much more
tie-ins to
recent.
the Act 250, the original Act 250 approvals as well, but those permits are separate and not, you know, entangled in each other.
We could not alter an Act 250 approval.
That's what I'm
reducing
questioning.
a setback. So we could not do that. So we're here because there is not an Act 250 order that establishes a 75-foot setback.
Well, actually, Greg, there may be. I don't want to speak to that because I don't know the full history of the Act 250 review from back in the 80s. But your authority is over subdivision plats that are recorded in the town of Hinesburg, and that plat showed a building setback limit that this applicant would like to revise. So that it's as simple as that.
did that plat get submitted as part of an Act 250 process so that it showed 75 foot, maybe established by the town, but showed a 75-foot stream buffer setback that the Act 250 process approved, verified, whatever? That's the information they were looking at?
I don't know the sequencing, John, to be honest with you, back in 85, 86, when this project was reviewed, whether Act 250 was happening prior to, at the same time, or after. But it doesn't matter. In the end, the town required that there be a plat recorded like every subdivision, has to have a plat recorded, and it was recorded with that building setback limit. So that's what's being requested, is to revise that plat based on the
All
town's.
Act 250 issues had been vetted before the environmental court addressed this case. So if that had been a potential issue in the Act 250 process, it was no longer a process when it got to the Superior Court.
I think you're right, Greg. I think, yeah, you're right.
Which means it becomes basically a town decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next.
Got one in the back, too.
It's Peter Erb. I just, you guys may all be remembering this, but one of the things that is frequently discussed, I think Ted brings it up a lot actually, is that there is, when you design a subdivision and you do setbacks and things, there is a presumption that it is going to remain that way, that neighbors and other people who have participated in those hearings, so when you build your house or whatever, you sort of build it based on what has been presented to you. And that doesn't mean it's bound in law or anything that it can't change. But I know previously you've been quite sensitive in several cases to make sure that the neighborhood or the people in the subdivision weren't sort of blindsided by an expectation that arose from the original layout of the subdivision. And I just would encourage you to make sure that that's the case here.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm Catherine Goldsmith. I just want to say briefly, similarly, I feel like in 1986, when the subdivision was approved by the Planning Commission / DRB at the time, that they looked at the entire area. And I feel like the building envelopes or the setbacks that was set at that time were set as a package, this is the way you can subdivide this large piece of land very close to the center of the village. So we can't go back and look in the minds of the people who were sitting on the board then, although I'd love to ask them, but I just feel like it was part of an organic decision and it shouldn't be changed so many years later.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Site plan, stormwater.
So I guess we're going to move on to, oh, okay.
Kenneth Brown. I was sitting on the board then when we looked at zoning for the village, and we looked at zoning for the area which is now where Kinney Drugs and all the zoning all the way up to Charlotte or Shelburne Road is, and opened up that for zoning. And we looked and said, how big of buildings do we want in this area? And we looked at the village and saw the size of the buildings that were there. And we looked at Commerce Park. And we looked at where we were proposing that we would open it up for commercial and residential building. And we decided 20,000 foot was the maximum that we wanted buildings to be. And I was on the select board. And we looked at Commerce Park and we said, you know, there's no building there over 20,000 foot, but we did see that one spot. But we said, maybe we should incorporate that into the village. And there are people here that will remember my suggesting that. And everybody on the board agreed that That would be a solution, because the village maximum was 20,000 feet, 20,000 square feet. But then somebody on the select board said, well, we really don't need to do that, because the only lot there that you could do that on is that one there that's empty. But people have looked at that, and you couldn't build a building that they're building there that's bigger than 20,000 square feet, because people have looked at that and it wouldn't hold a big building like that, because it's a swamp, it's wetlands, and you can't build a big building like that there. So we don't need to worry about that. So we zoned all this space up north of here for bigger buildings, 20,000 square feet, and we just left that because maybe you could build a bandstand there in a city park and some other smaller buildings, commercial buildings, and we left it that way. And I think we made a mistake.
Thank you.
All right, I'll mention that we're at 8:45, Dennis.
What's that?
We're at 8:45.
Yep.
The time that we wanted to.
All right, we're going to move on to stormwater. And what's that?
Well, it's the stormwater part of the site plan.
Right.
So open the hearing? Open the hearing?
Opening.
Yeah.
So into the site plan portion of this now?
Yeah, I'm opening it up. Yep.
Okay.
Without having closed any other part.
Right. Everything is still open.
So, Mitch, if you would go to, I think it's number 2? Yes. So let me, if I may, again, David White, on behalf of Hannaford, give you a quick overview of the project to refresh the memory of those who are already aware of it. And actually, I'd like to have the whole plan to start with, and then we can focus in and introduce those who may not be as familiar with the project. So this is on Lot 15 of Commerce Park. And on the plan here, we have Mechanicsville Road, and this is Commerce Street, and just off the plan is 116, right over here, heading north-south. This is the Bank of Middlebury, this is the post office, and there is the existing man-made canal that comes along here, and Patrick Brook is well off this plan, but behind the lots on the opposite side of Commerce Street. We're proposing a 36,000 square foot supermarket. The building, which I will show you a rendering of in a moment, was the architecture for it is custom designed for Hinesburg. There's not another one like it, and grew out of a charrette process that we did here locally. The plan includes enhancing pedestrian connections so that there's a missing section of sidewalk along Commerce Street through here, which we will infill. We will then take the existing sidewalk that comes along past the bank and extend that into the site. And then we will also connect the path that goes along the canal with a couple of approaches, one if you're coming from the north and one if you're coming from the south, into this corner of the canopy along the front facade of the building. The building itself, this is where the front entry is at this point. The canopy wraps around 3 sides of the building, providing some real architectural variation. Again, you'll see that in a moment. There are a total of about 128 parking spaces located both beside the building here on the north and along this side to the east. The loading occurs back here so that trucks will come in. There's a hammerhead at this point. They pull into and then back in before then circulating back out in that direction. There's extensive landscaping. I won't detail it, but along the canal pathway, there are some areas where there are gaps in the row of trees. We will infill those trees. A fair amount of dense planting here on the side of the building. It will include a little pocket park that's adjacent to the footbridge, or very close to it. So as you cross the footbridge, you'll be looking right at that. That'll have seating and dense plantings around it, and then extensive plantings both in the middle of the parking lot on these islands. This is a large island, and then some smaller ones, and then also around the perimeter, as well as then some street trees along here and more plantings through here. One element of this is that as a result of interest in seeing some public amenities, we added not only this pocket park, and we have offered to the town an easement for, it's a little under an acre, to make this. Right now, there's an easement only for a 20-foot wide easement for a walking path. We have offered, and it's part of what was approved in our 2012 approval, that the town has the right to, if it accepts it, it's a town's choice. It's about an acre, slightly under acre, for a public park that will incorporate that. In addition, an easement for, we added on a section of land. This portion right here was not originally part of Lot 15. It was part of the Automotion site, and we made an arrangement with the Giros to purchase this additional piece of land to add it on so that the farmers market, if it were to be reconstituted, had the opportunity, if they chose, to do the farmers market in this area out of the congestion that was present when it was along 116. And that there's a mix for those who prefer to be in a grassy area, they could be here. For those who prefer to be on a paved area working out of the back of their trucks, they could be here. And so we've offered to the town that as well. So those are the basic elements of the site plan. I will say that there are some off-site improvements that relate to traffic. I will not go through those today because traffic is scheduled for, I believe it's sometime in May, whatever, May 15th perhaps, at a hearing, and we'll go over those at that time. But there are some off-site improvements associated with this. So I think those are the key elements there. If you'd go, Mitch, to the next one, 03. So this is a quick look at the building and the design for the building. This is the eastern facade that would face the parking lot. This is the main entrance to the building. You can see the canopy here. This is the area that projects, that edge there is within about 43 feet of the edge of the canal. And the canopy, you can see, wraps along the building and then also around the other side over here toward the north. The entryway is here. You've got, rain protection and so forth walking under the canopy along in that area. And it's a two-story sized facade, and there are windows along here that actually allow light into the building. So that those are functional windows that you have along that upper story there. This is the southern facade that would be facing toward the canal and Mechanicsville Road. And again, you've got the two-story facade with the windows. You've got the canopy that extends along here. And we also have solar panels as part of this facing south. Those are photovoltaic panels along that southern facade. And again, this is a unique design that came out of a charrette process that we held open to the public here back 5 or 6, 7 years ago, whenever it was, years ago. So it's specific to Hinesburg. We can see the next one, please. So at this point, actually, I'm sorry, would you back up to, I did want to talk about one other thing. Sorry, I forgot. Go to number 2 again. One other thing I wanted to discuss. So this plan that you're looking at here is in almost all respects, with the exception I'm about to describe, identical to what was approved by this board, by the DRB in 2012. The one area of exception is here along the northern edge of the lot. At the time that the DRB approved this, our stormwater design, the stormwater, and our civil engineer will talk in more detail about stormwater in just a moment, but I want to give you just a quick overview. The stormwater flows from this site today through a 30-foot wide easement and swale that's right along here between Dark Star and the Firehouse Plaza. And it goes through a culvert under Commerce Street and into a stormwater basin that is on the northern side of Commerce Street before it ultimately discharges into Patrick Brook. There are some pre-existing issues with occasional flooding on the Dark Star property from the way this functions or fails to function properly and flow. We had originally proposed to do improvements of this swale. The owner of Dark Star objected to that, us doing the improvements within the swale. And so to put that aside as an issue, despite the fact that we had a fully approved stormwater discharge permit from the state of Vermont, Agency of Natural Resources, that was unappealed and we fully approved, we voluntarily said, fine, we will take it out of that. We don't want to fight with you over who's got the right to improve that swale, even though there's an easement for it. And we did some changes here to move what the function of that swale would have been into this area entirely within our lot. That required some modification in this area that included somewhat larger, more extensive retaining walls, and a little bit of a minor shift in terms of the shape of the hammerhead for the turnaround for the trucks. But the changes are limited to this area and the details related to that. The other change was that there was a request from the town because the existing culvert under Commerce Street was undersized and at too high elevation. We were asked to take a look at whether we could improve the drainage by replacing that, and we did propose to replace that with a slightly larger culvert and lower its elevation so that you could flow water through there and drain this area and reduce some of the pre-existing problems. So the two changes were at the request of others for the culvert and for this, that resulted in some minor changes here. Other than that, this plan is identical to what was approved in 2012 by the DRB.
So is the treatment occurring in a different location?
The treatment
is occurring there now.
Is now here rather than here.
And is this the configuration that was approved by the environmental court?
That's correct. This is as approved by the environmental court.
And then reversed by the issue was briefed in the Supreme Court and then not reached.
Okay, it's still open for discussion.
So with that, I'd like to turn over to our civil engineer, Paul O'Leary, who will go through more details relative to the stormwater, because that's the major focus this evening relative to site plan.
All right, thank you.
So my name is Paul O'Leary. I'm with O'Leary Burke Civil Associates. And on the board in front of you is the existing conditions plan, C1. So we have Commerce Street runs on the top, Route 116, Mechanicsville along this side. We have Patrick Brook is at the top of the screen, just off the plan. So if we work backwards from Patrick Brook, existing between lots 2, which is the gas station, and lots 3, which is tailhook towing, is a grass drainage swale that goes down. There is an outlet structure on that property. It's essentially non-functional. There's a culvert that crosses Commerce Street right here that feeds that swale. The existing culvert is a 15-inch metal pipe that goes across in relatively poor condition. And that culvert pipe picks up all of the drainage from the Dark Star lot, which is 11, all the drainage from lot 12, which is also Dark Star owns next to it, picks up about the back 2/3 of the National Bank of Middlebury property, picks up about half of the health center's property, and picks up roughly about the back 1/3 of the post office property. The front of these lots go into a drainage swale along the street, and they actually cross in a culvert right here and go to a different discharge point. So the total area that goes to the cross culvert is roughly about 10 acres. The Hannaford site is a little bit less than 5, so it contributes a little bit less than half of the water that goes. As Mr. White pointed out, there's a grass swale that runs here, a 30-foot wide easement that's between the Firehouse Plaza and the Dark Star property. There's a relatively undefined swale that runs along the north side of Lot 15, and again, another swale that runs on the west side of Lot 15. None of those swales have been maintained in at least the last 5 to 8 years. They're in pretty rough shape if you go to look at them. I think recently we had a site visit on the Dark Star property, and you could see that, there was water ponding in places in its parking lot in the back because the swale is in relatively desperate need of some maintenance. So just to recap, almost all our property, Lot 15, drains towards that point and crosses that culvert, and a majority of the other properties on that side of the street go to that culvert. We know that the culvert is undersized. There's lots of evidence that was presented originally showing how in larger storms, water ponded on the Dark Star property. Sheet S6, which we don't need to bring up, but that shows the extent that the model predicts that flooding occurs under the existing condition on those properties. There's quite a bit of flooding on Dark Star. There's actually flooding that occurs on the Giroux property, flooding that occurs on Lot 15, and a little bit of flooding that occurs on the formerly parcel 10, the Firehouse Plaza. So no question that the culvert's undersized, and there's quite a bit of flooding that occurs now. So if we could go to S1, please. So our stormwater system, originally design started back in 2009. It was designed under the 2009 Hinesburg zoning regulations and designed under the 2002 State of Vermont stormwater regs. And that's what our initial permit was under those rules, and our current permit that's being appealed, that's been issued, is also under the 2002 Vermont State stormwater rules. So if we look at the site and we start in the same place, we have Patrick Brook on the top. And then we have a new stormwater treatment area swale that's being constructed between lots 2 and lot 3. Originally, Krebs and Lansing designed this feature. It was supposed to have been constructed at some time in the past, never was. So essentially, there's a potential violation of the permit that it never got done. In our case, Hannaford has agreed to construct that feature as designed and approved by Krebs. So what's shown on the plan is identical to what Krebs' plan originally showed in terms of the grading, the outlet structures, the elevations, et cetera. In the staff notes, Mitch noted that the elevation of that pond was about 332, and looking at the GIS data, it looked like the elevation of Patrick Brook was also 332. GIS data is notorious for missing brooks and small ditches. We have actual survey data that shows that the elevation of Patrick Brook is 330. So it's actually 2 feet difference in grade between the brook and the pond as Krebs designed it. So we do expect that the pond, will function correctly as Krebs originally intended and as the state of Vermont approved as part of the Krebs application. So as we come along, that new feature that's being installed by Hannaford, we come to the existing 12-inch culvert, and which, as I noted before, causes quite a bit of ponding on the properties on the south side of Commerce Street. Now, as part of the approval process in the environmental court, the town asked if there was anything we could do to lessen the flooding on the properties to the south of Commerce. And we agreed that we would replace the existing 12-inch culvert with a new 15-inch culvert, an increase of about 45% in area, and that we would lower the culvert approximately 6 to 8 inches. So basically what that allows is less flooding to occur on the Dark Star property. It's a bigger culvert, so it flows more water. It's at a lower elevation, So it also flows more water or tends to drain the Dark Star property more thoroughly than what is drained today. So as we looked at a design in 2009, we knew that there was a history of flooding on the Dark Star piece. By rights, the fact that all our property drained to that swale, we could continue to discharge our stormwater to that swale. Certain regulations we have to meet, we can't discharge at any higher rate than we did pre-development. But what we elected to do instead is to try to lessen the burden on this property. And so we decided that we would take the majority of our flow and actually pipe it down the road to Commerce and then to the new swale. So we take the majority of the stormwater coming off this property and bypass the problem area. So that was something voluntarily that Hannaford decided to do. So when we look at our site, obviously you have the building here, we have a front parking area, and then we have this smaller parking area and truck dock area to the north. We have two stormwater systems, two separate stormwater systems that are on site. The one in the front is the larger system, and that collects about 2/3 of the building and most all of the front parking lot. The smaller system here collects this corner of the building and then collects this section of the parking lot. All our stormwater is collected by pipe or by catch basins. So the whole parking lot is surrounded by concrete curb. Most of the parking lot drains into a low central area, which is here. On the side parking lot, a portion of it drains here. Most of it drains back towards the truck dock. As you can imagine, the truck dock is typically 4 feet lower than the finished floor area. It makes a logical point to drain your stormwater back to. So when we were designing the system, we collected all in a catch basin, and then, why don't you go to the next sheet so we have a little bit bigger scale, please, Mitch, S2. So we have a system, we have a collection system here, an underground detention area. And we have a catch basin that collects some of this building and most of this area, and then the catch basin discharges to what's called a water quality unit. The water quality unit is a 4-foot diameter pipe, 40 feet long. It has an oil water separator in it and a grit chamber. Under the old state of Vermont rules of the 2002 stormwater rules, we got no credit for installing this pre-treatment device. Basically, the state determined if it's not listed in our rules, we won't give you credit for it. But the water quality unit typically does remove 80% of the total suspended solids and typically will remove somewhere between 40 and 50% of the total phosphorus that comes through. So it is a very effective treatment device. So we have one here that feeds this system, and then we have another one right here that feeds this system. So all the stormwater collected goes through this water quality unit before it goes into storage. Once it goes into storage, we have another water quality unit. It's called an isolator row. There's an isolator row in this system, and then there's one in each of these individual systems. So a total of 5 different isolator rows. The isolator row is, again, a device that provides water quality treatment. On its own, typically considered to remove 80% of the total suspended solids and roughly about 50% of the total phosphorus. Like the water quality unit, the isolator rows in the 2002 manual were not an approved stormwater device. So we agreed to put the device in, but we got no credit for it in terms of applying and getting a stormwater discharge permit. So we then have underground storage. We have this area here, and we have this area here. The underground storage both discharge to a pipe and then goes to a catch basin. And in the catch basin, there's a splitter structure. So it diverts the small flows, the water quality flows, into the new grass channel. And that is an approved water quality device by the state of Vermont. So it's that grass channel that we use to meet the water quality requirements in our state permit. The remainder of the flow then goes down via pipe through Commerce Street and then discharges into that new feature we're constructing between Lot 2 and Lot 3. So if we look at a small water quality storm, so a water quality storm is a storm in the 2002 rules that's 9/10 of an inch or less. In the new rules, they've bumped the water quality storm up to 1 inch. So by definition, 90% of all storms, all rainfall events that occur are at the water quality level or less. So in other words, it's 2/10 of an inch, it's 3/10, it's a half an inch, it's 7/10. So the reason we focus on a water quality storm is that's the one that we get the most bang for our buck to provide treatment for. So we look to treat the smaller storms because that encompasses 90% of all storms that occur. So typically, the way we try to meet the water quality standards is by removing the suspended solids. Most of the pollutants attach to these solids, and so if you can get the solids, you get the majority of the pollutants. So the idea of the grass channel is that will be effective in removing 80% or more of the total suspended solids that comes down that swale before going down the existing swale between Firehouse Plaza and Dark Star. But in our case, we go through a water quality unit which effectively removes 80% of the solids. We then go into the isolator row in the stormwater system that should remove 80% of whatever's left for solid. And then finally, we discharge into the grass swale. So when we have a larger storm, say we have the 1 year or the 2 year storm occurs.
Why are you only taking out 50% of the phosphorus at both stages?
That's what these type of treatment practices typically do. The grass swale will get a little bit more phosphorus out of it than the two chambers. And typically, under a water quality, the state looks for you to get 80% or more of the total suspended solids, which all three will meet. And then it looks for you to get 50 to 60% minimum of the total phosphorus.
As a layman, phosphorus seems to be an issue in the Champlain Valley.
Yes, it is. And that's why it's new. Under the old rules, they don't talk about phosphorus removal. The new 2017 rules do put a phosphorus standard.
Is there anything you can do to improve your interception?
To improve the amount of phosphorus?
Yeah.
Possibly, but in this case, we've got 3 separate treatment devices all doing the same thing. So we think cumulatively, we're probably doing pretty well on the phosphorus removal. So if we have a larger storm, a 10-year storm, what happens is the catch basins collect the water goes through the water quality units. Staff had made a comment that this water quality unit had a bypass and this one didn't. It's because this treats a smaller area, and this water quality unit is big enough to be able to treat the 10-year flow. The other water quality unit, because it's a bigger area going to it, is not large enough to handle the 10-year flow, so it's bypassed. And that's pretty typical. We just look to treat the water quality event and not necessarily the 10-year storm. But a 10-year storm occurs, the catch basin's collected, it goes through the water quality units, it goes into the isolator rows and all these systems, and then it begins to fill up. And the storm is stored in this underground system, and there's a control structure that regulates how much water is released. And essentially, in a 10-year storm, we release water at a slower rate than what was released in the pre-development storm. And that's what the stormwater rules require. In the 1 year, the 2 year, and the 10-year storm, you have to release water at the same rate or less than the pre-development. In fact, we added enough storage so that we actually will provide enough storage for the 25-year storm. Under the state rules, we're only required to go up to the 10-year. But we have enough storage for the 25-year storm in this case. So we have a current...
Can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yep.
We got a couple more experts here, so you're gonna have to wrap it up.
I'm going to wrap it up.
in the next few
I'm going to wrap it up. So we have a stormwater permit for the system. And I'd point out that in this case, instead of doing the minimum, Hannaford has done a lot more. We've agreed to construct the feature across the street that should have been constructed by others. We've gone to the expense of bypassing, taking most of our flow and bypassing the problem area where Dark Star is. We've added the water quality units, which we get no credit for, but they're there because it provides a better level of stormwater treatment. We've added the isolator rows, which again, we get no credit for, but it certainly increases the amount of stormwater treatment that we get. So in pretty much all cases, and then we have storage capacity for 25 years when we're only required to do the 10-year storm. So in our view, Hannaford's gone over and above to design a good quality system for Lot 15.
And the status of your state permit right now is you have a state permit?
It's been issued, it's been appealed. That's the second. The first permit, as David said, was issued and was not appealed. We amended the permit to move the treatment swale from between Dark Star and Firehouse Plaza to this location. That permit was issued, and that permit's been appealed to environmental court.
Well, does that mean it's been remanded by the Supreme Court, or it's just kind of held in abeyance, waiting for the remand of everything else?
I'll let the high-powered help address that. So.
All right, never mind.
I'm happy to address that. It has not been reviewed by the Supreme Court. It has been appealed to the environmental division, and there it sits until it all gets gathered together into hopefully one big hearing process.
So I just have a question about, sorry, thank you. About, you've mentioned how we've gone above and beyond for the 2002 regulations. I know it's in litigation about the next, the 2009 regulations, if that's, my dates may not right, no, the 2017 regulations, right? The most recent. What are the elements that we're looking at? Where are we not compliant with those 2017 regulations?
We haven't examined the 2017 regulations in detail and gone down through it point by point. I mean, the only way we can really do it is to almost prepare a 2017 application to really, the new application process is substantially different than what it was in 2002. So it's hard just to look and compare. The elements are the same. You're looking for recharge, you're looking for water quality, you're looking for channel protection, which is the 1-year flow, and you're looking for overbank protection, which is the 10-year flow, the 10-year storm. So initially in the 2002 rules, we met all 4 of those requirements. 2017 rules, I can't say. We haven't gone through it point by point.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Well,
All right, I'll open it up to the public. Want to go first?
Which document would it be?
There are about 6 different exhibits.
Yes.
They're clearly labeled.
Which one would you like to start with?
The existing conditions. And my testimony and actually these plates are, I'm just handing out. It's something that's,
So is this something in the Dropbox?
It came today.
All right, then.
You will find it under public comments.
All right, well, I'm probably not good enough to
Yeah, I can
get
come
it
help.
electronically
Greg.
tonight. Let's see here. Or is it that? No, it's not that.
If you want me to zoom in on, Mr. Will, if you want me to zoom in on an area, let me know.
you can zoom in a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, do you have a certain spot you want me to zoom in on? A place to really go, to make it larger. on the
Yeah, go
screen.
ahead.
Do you have a certain spot that you would like to?
I just clicked on.
Am I doing this or are you doing this?
You're doing it. I'm just trying to help.
I'm fine with it just the way it is.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. I'm not the most electronic wizard of the bunch.
Well, if I can help, let me know.
Huh?
If I can help, let me know.
That's fine. I'm Stephen Revelle. I'm a certified professional geologist, hydrogeologist. I'm the president of Lincoln Applied Geology, and I've been working in this field for about 40 years. I'm going to give you just some general comments to start with, and then I'm just going to go as quickly as I can through the testimony that you have in front of you and that's been published. What do I do in cases like this? I provide input regarding the presence of wetlands, their water quality function, and the and I define the hydrogeologic system that supports them. And it's all about surface and groundwater protection, as defined in the wetland rules. What have I done in this regard recently? I've reviewed the applicant's current submittals, the C series and the S series, site plans and details. You can't deal with water quality and with stormwater and collection devices without an understanding of the unconsolidated non-bedrock geology, soils, groundwater data, and there's very limited groundwater data in terms of real-time data, collected data. There are 12 borings and unfortunately only 2 monitoring wells that were monitored for a month-long period. And the source of flowing water through this property, precipitation, the canal, groundwater flow from up-gradient drainage basin southeast of Lot 15 across Mechanicsville Road. I'm just going to point out a few things that are important when you're evaluating these systems, and it's not to be too myopic. You need to understand the overall system. And in this regard, wetland / surface water flow and groundwater flow are absolutely interrelated, integrated systems. You can't deal with one without dealing with the other. Shallow groundwater system, dealing with the overall shallow groundwater system, not just on Lot 15. It's beneath all of Commerce Park. It's beneath all of the village of Hinesburg. And it's
What do you mean by a shallow groundwater system?
The shallow unconsolidated.
Topical treatment?
The shallow unconsolidated groundwater system. The one that's most present, in the shallow subsurface, not the bedrock aquifer. The unconsolidated aquifer, surficial aquifer. I'm dealing with sensitive systems, and I'm looking at this application as being the extension of the progressive elimination of natural systems that truly protect our aquifers, streams, and rivers. We're taking existing diffuse flow through a very significant shallow groundwater system, and we're manipulating it and turning it into a very discrete flow with their in-place stormwater system. That's just general comments. The first exhibit is their existing conditions map. It shows the NRCS soil distribution. It shows the wetlands that have been mapped, and it generally shows the presence of a sand lens that extends from the canal downslope, and ultimately it was defined at the western limit of Lot 15. Applicants delineated a large wetland complex on Lot 15 and the surrounding lots, several acres in size. It's defined on that exhibit. The wetland is caused in part by the seepage of stream water from the canal onto Lot 15. Soil borings by the applicant define a sand lens about 5 feet deep. That is well defined on that. And can you go to the next exhibit?
Sure.
Let's see if it's the right one. Not that one.
Okay. Sand lens?
Right there. And if you can blow that up for me.
Is this one of the ones on our Dropbox, Alex?
Yes, for those of you that are in the right Dropbox or Goodreader spot, this one's titled Revell Sand Lens.
Sand lens. Okay.
Yeah, Revell sand lens defines the 5-foot thick sand lens bounded by the green lines on the north and the south, emanating from the canal and having been defined leaving the property on the western boundary. This is not to say that some sand is also present to the north of that green line. I'm really defining the most significant portion of that sand lens, the 5-foot deep or thick one. You also see the wetlands and the wetland boundaries here, and then you see a line of cross section basically from southeast to northwest, from the canal to the corner of the property adjacent to the Dark Star property.
So are you relying on borings done by the applicant?
What?
Are you relying on borings done by the applicant?
I certainly am. They're the only ones that exist on this, and I didn't put in my own. Soil borings by the applicant revealed a sand lens. I've just described it. The seepage from the canal flows through the sand lens. That sand lens represents a natural sand filter, and it flows in the direction of Patrick Brook on the north side of Commerce Street.
Your third page here, if I can maybe ask for some other information here, is that you're saying that the sand lens would be dewatered because of the drainage out of some of the underground tanks. What impact does that have?
You're going to dewater that shallow groundwater system. That is going to reduce groundwater storage, which over time would represent the base flow or the low flow recharge to the brook. It would also reduce the amount of groundwater recharge down gradient of this system, extending onto other lots within Commerce Park. Not only does the sand filter the groundwater, it also acts as a sponge, as I just indicated, holding water for later release to the stream during low flow periods when groundwater is the most important source of that stream flow. Impact on Hannaford Plan on groundwater, impact of the Hannaford Plan on groundwater. The proposed store will be constructed on a pad 2 to 5 feet thick, placed over the existing wet meadow. There obviously have mitigated the wetland impact through mitigation off-site through the federal program. That does nothing to protect groundwater flow to Patrick Brook and the La Platte River downstream. The applicant has basically indicated that the groundwater function will continue under this fill pad. The problem is that they're proposing the stormwater chambers under the fill pad, which will effectively dewater it. Those stormwater chambers are sitting in the water table, and there will be continuous flow. If there's not stormwater flow through and out of them, there will certainly be ongoing, absolutely continuous groundwater flow, and thus the resulting dewatering of the shallow groundwater system. The system that is recharging the groundwater system on all sides of Lot 15. So it's reducing filtration and reducing the storage of groundwater that has the ability to feed Patrick Brook. The next is the section.
Do you want to go to the next drawing?
What?
You want to go to the next drawing?
Yeah, please.
What's its caption?
It would be the section.
Wetland section.
And it's certainly impossible to read this from distance, but and blowing it up would certainly be good. Let's start on the right-hand side of it. All right, we start with the canal. You can see the ground surface, the green. You can see the existing groundwater system in the upper blue. You can see the proposed ground surface in red. You can see the underground storage vaults sitting in the water table in red, the square. Let's see, the drainage to a vault, part of the stormwater system. Let's keep moving to the left, please. And obviously, you know, you've got your 4-foot and 5-foot sand lens that I've been discussing. You can see the imposition of the building on this overall cross section. You can see the downslope vault, groundwater, the chambers again, and you can see, if you go back to the right a bit, you can see the upper blue, which is existing groundwater level, and then you can see the lower dash blue, which is the lower imposed or dewatered groundwater system, which is obviously at the base of the structures and placed beneath the parking lot, the stormwater system. Keep going to the left, please. This is, you can see there 2 to 5 foot fill, and then finally at the most down gradient end, and keep going just a bit. I think you're there. You're dropping into that grass channel. A section of the site from the canal, much of this is what I've just described, and through the fill pad demonstrate what will happen. The existing ground surface is the upper green, the canal is the right side, the sand lens depicted by the lower green line extending halfway across the section. The estimate of the lowered or dewatered groundwater table is the lower blue line. And then finally on the far left is the swale at Dark Star. The red line, obviously, just described. The red lines are the imposed grade, the fill. The what?
What's the vertical exaggeration on this?
335 to 345?
No, the vertical exaggeration, it's made.
Well, 10 feet?
Yeah, just usually there's a, all right, just wanted to mention that for clarity, just so it doesn't confuse any people.
We'll try to clarify that for you. The building foundation should just touch the existing ground level, but the stormwater chambers they are proposing will be placed 3 to 4 feet deep into the existing sand lens. In other words, into the groundwater system. The bottom of the chambers drain out through a pipe, thus dewatering the sand lens, as I've said numbers of times, and then eliminating the storage function of the wetland. Additional impacts on groundwater. As if it wasn't bad enough, recent correspondence from the applicants suggests that in order to ensure they will meet the stormwater recharge standard, and Andres Terrazzo, following me, will discuss this. They may be excavating and replacing soils under the east-west swale. That's the swale adjacent to the southern Dark Star property line. This would be done to turn the grass channel into a dry swale, suitable to meet recharge standard. A dry swale would need permeable soils and generally would require an underdrain. Note that we have not seen any plans yet for this dry swale, and based on the previous testimony, it appears to be a wet swale again, with, depending on some level of infiltration. I will tell you, based on the native soils out there and the data on their plan, you can model the ability of that grass swale to infiltrate any level or whatever level of stormwater it can. And that type of analysis would be referred to as a hand tush analysis performed on recharge basins, and it can be applied to an infiltration swale or a grass swale or channel, and there will be, to the greatest degree, absolutely no infiltration because the mounting analysis shows the groundwater level mounting 2 and 3 feet above that level. In other words, no infiltration will take place. It will be channelized flow, overland flow. Overall, the stormwater system is going to drop the water table several feet. It's going to reduce groundwater storage. It's going to have some effect on the wetlands in the swale adjacent to Dark Star. Groundwater recharge, because we're short-circuiting the groundwater system and we're guiding it out and through and ultimately onto the brook, we eliminate that natural groundwater recharge throughout the system beneath the overall Commerce Park. It generally, when I see a plan like this, we're taking water from up gradient, the canal, moving through the system. We're capturing it or intercepting it with a stormwater system, and we're then routing it down to the northern end or the down gradient end of the property. It's generally a counterproductive thing to drain the existing sand lands on the canal side of the site and then try to recharge it on the north side of the site. And in fact, the recharge will be non-existent, as I've noted. Maintain 75-foot setback in the groundwater table, while the stormwater chambers and their drains are proposed outside the 75-foot building setback from the canal. Their impact will extend well into that setback area originally intended to protect the canal as a stream. We're going to set up a change in gradient from that naturally flowing from the canal, and we're going to increase that gradient and increase the groundwater velocity, leaving that stream and setting up the potential of groundwater piping, which is essentially internal erosion related to increased velocity and gradient of a groundwater system. And you unfortunately risk the possibility of some limited to full-scale failure of that canal in doing so. When I noted earlier that there was incredibly limited amount of groundwater information, I'm talking about groundwater information that draws a relationship and defines that relationship between the canal, the sand lens, the clay system with sand lenses, small, that bound that clay lens, and there's generally an incredible lack of groundwater information to define the long-term impacts of placing a significant dewatering system in it. And that's exactly what this proposal is in my eyes.
In 75 words, or 25 words, since we've been
Wow,
using those numbers,
hydrogeologists have trouble with that.
Can you kind of condense what your observations, objections, or what inferences or conclusions you wish the board to draw from your testimony tonight relating to what you say are deficiencies in the stormwater treatment proposal from the applicant? I'm really trying to focus on what your core points are.
Well, you're eliminating
75 words or less.
you're eliminating groundwater recharge. You're eliminating a storage of the normal storage within a groundwater system.
And how does that relate to what we as a board are charged under our bylaws with regulating?
Well, I think it ultimately extends to the functions of the wetlands. And then it certainly extends to the potential negative impacts related to the canal by effectively dewatering, creating a gradient, and setting up a system that could result in piping, which could in fact result in the significant impact of that canal and the migration or the discharge of groundwater out of it.
Mr. Williams, if you look at section 5.1.2.
Wait.
We don't expect 5.1.2 of the subdivision regulations. We don't expect our hydrogeologists to know all the subdivision regulations. 5.1.2.
Okay.
Thanks.
So is that going to increase the amount of water that actually comes off of the site? Is that one of the effects of dewatering and creating that gradient?
Yeah, you're not just going to be dealing with stormwater in a stormwater event, you're going to be dealing and moving groundwater through that system in perpetuity and in a continuous fashion. And I can model the amount of groundwater leaving that canal in general terms. But frankly, that's an analysis that needs to be done by the applicant to ensure you're not creating a problem relative to that canal and its stability. You can't do that without groundwater monitoring wells and testing methodology that indicates more quantitatively what the levels we're talking about.
So if I'm understanding it, so the solid blue line is where it is now, the dotted blue line is where you would expect it to drop to because of the systems that they would put into place. So the fact that the two lines come together while you're still on the property, so it would drop the water level in certain areas on the property, but it wouldn't drop the water table or the water level off the property because it looks like it's back at the same level before you leave the property.
On the down gradient end, it would generally end up being at essentially the same level.
Okay.
But you're chopping the head off of it, and the diagram isn't, the diagram's an estimate, basically. And you pick up on something that we should have done better on. With that section. And in fact, even the down gradient portion of that groundwater system would be lowered. But you need to understand that initially I talked about you couldn't look at a groundwater system just within the boundaries of Lot 15. So when you chop the head off that water table and drop it in the gut of that system, the groundwater system, the remaining groundwater system adjacent to that property is going to try to reach equilibrium again. And so you're going to get flow on the down gradient side beneath the chambers. You're going to get flow from the east, from the west, and in fact some from the north to compensate for that removal. That's why generally you see that groundwater system not being depressed down there because it's not being dewatered down there. Mm-hmm. And the groundwater system on all sides of it is going to move in to compensate for the removal.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the structural integrity of the canal, if that's a concern, is there a way to mitigate that aside from not the no placement of those underground tanks? Is there a structural concern? Is there any monitoring that can be occurred? Are there any other?
Well, the first thing you would do is you would characterize the system better. You define a relationship between that sand lens, the leakage from the canal, and you would be in a much better position to anticipate and actually model that influence or that impact. Talking about mitigation of a potential problem without that type of characterization is really shooting into the crystal ball. And I can't do that with the limited amount of data that's available to me. I mean, there are two monitoring wells. The rule of thumb, honestly, in 40 years of experience putting holes in the ground, is if you got a hole in the ground, a boring per se, there's more to be collected than soil data or structural data related to the soils. Put a monitoring well in it. Let's look at the response of the ground. Where's the groundwater system throughout this site? what are the components of that groundwater system? And in fact, if you want to go beyond that and really have an understanding of flow from that canal, you would put in something called a series of piezometers, which actually measure the head or the pressure within the groundwater system to determine whether you've got downward flow, upward flow, or absolutely balanced horizontal flow. And the observation well closest to the canal that was basically put within the footprint of that building, not necessarily in the sands, but in the clays with some minor sand lenses. Over the month-long period, you saw some level of upward flow, meaning you've got a recharge body in the canal that's higher than the site, and you're essentially setting up with the materials bounding it a U-tube. Okay, so there's a head placed on that system to result in upward flow at that point in the system. The only other point of monitoring was to the north in an observation point, a boring reasonably close to the grass swale on the Dark Star property, or essentially where their east-west swale or grass channel's going to go. So there needs to, frankly, from my perspective, as an experienced hydrogeologist, you know, if I'm on a boring rig and I'm putting a boring into essentially clays or silts, and then sands, and then bounded by clays and silts, I'm constructing more monitoring wells because the soil data is telling me to. Because I'm worried about changes. I'm worried about groundwater flow characteristics, and I'm worried about emplacing these rather large stormwater devices that are going to unnaturally dewater the groundwater system and impose increased gradients, particularly from the canal.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
It's getting late, but we have one.
Yeah, Mr. Trejo?
Can you just state your name, please?
My name is Laurie Barnett, and I live on the canal. When we had Irene, when I went to church in the morning, the water was at the top of the canal, and when I came home, the water was out of the canal. There was never any flooding because that's man-controlled, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that as part of what I'm hearing you say.
I'm very aware of its control. Flashboards or however they control it down in the air, I believe on the west side of 116.
Okay, that was not at all clear in your discussion.
Well,
Actually, there was
no
a lot
matter
that
how they
wasn't
control
clear.
that level, and I do know that they control that level, there's saturated conditions in that canal. There's stream flow or flow in that canal, you know, and that sets up a scenario where as long as you've got water in that canal, water can be leaving that canal, seeping from that canal into lot 15. In
Sometimes
fact,
there's water in the canal and sometimes there's not water in the canal. I mean, it's not a natural
If there's not
canal.
water in that canal, then there can't be seepage out of it. But there's a groundwater flow underneath that channel.
Okay.
From upstream, from the other side of Mechanicsville Road, that heavily populated or built-on area that's the drainage, that's a portion of the drainage basin that contributes to the groundwater system on Lot 15.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're trying to do 6 weeks of in office before it's too late.
What's that?
We're trying to get on this done before we all fall asleep.
So it's getting late, so hoping you can do this in...
I'll be really quick.
Perfect.
All right, well, thanks. My name is Andres Terizo. I'm principal watershed consulting. I've been doing stormwater specifically in Vermont for over 15 years. This is all we do. I've looked at this project for a number of years, and so I just want to hit on a couple of the different stormwater criteria as related to the stormwater manual. And talk about, there's the 2002 manual and the 2017 manual, okay? So the first standard is the water quality standard, the pollutants in the stormwater. And my understanding now is that the town's going to be reviewing this application as part of the 2017 manual. The water quality component of the design is the grass channel area, which we heard some testimony on. Just to be clear, the tanks being discussed and also the chambers are not approved as water quality devices either in the 2002 manual or in the 2017 manual. That's because those are good devices for trapping the particles, but that's not all the things that are in stormwater. There's also, in terms of phosphorus, there's about 50% of the phosphorus is actually dissolved. So a tank or the isolator row in the chambers, although they're good for trapping, the solids, they're not going to be trapping the dissolved. So that's why they're not approved for a water quality device. So the swale, as we were saying, the swale in terms of the 2017 manual, the grass channel, which was being proposed under the 2002 rules, is no longer an approved device either. You can't use a grass swale, and the reason, or it's called a grass channel. And the reason is because the grass channel, the state found, just aren't very effective, and so they're not included in the new manual. So in order for that grass feature to be approved under the 2017 manual, it would need to have some kind of a filtration component, and that's because you really get the good stormwater treatment by filtering the stormwater through something like a sand filter. And so essentially you would have the swale and then the water would be able to filter through. And that's only doable if you have a condition where you don't have groundwater right up close to the surface. But in this case, groundwater right in that location is actually right at the surface. And so without having separation to groundwater, there's no opportunity to basically get that filtration. And so you wouldn't necessarily be able to meet the standards necessarily without having some kind of an underdrain feature, meaning like a perforated drain in the bottom several feet down under the swale layer. So that would require basically installing an underdrain, which would then have an outlet, and having that, and I haven't seen any plan proposed with this type of a system, but I think in terms of where that outlet elevation would need to be located, it would be really difficult to actually get it to freely drain. And that would also, I think, complicate the issues that Steve had just testified about draining, essentially dewatering the wetland, because the perforated drain would also be picking up groundwater. So it becomes a problematic design to get that type of an underdrain feature installed. So that really goes to the water quality standard and then also the recharge standard, because without having the separation to the groundwater, there's no way to recharge because your groundwater is already right there at the surface. So it becomes problematic from the standpoint of meeting the water quality standard and the recharge standard. So those are two of the standards that are required under the 2017 manual. And then, so the third standard is the overbank flood protection standard. And that's a standard that really requires the detention of the stormwater to prevent downstream flooding impacts. And based on the modeling that was produced by the applicant, there's a significant increase in the peak discharge proposed after the project's developed. So as part of an application, the state requires you run a hydrologic model to basically predict through modeling the existing condition discharge and the post-development discharge. And then comparing those two, essentially, to meet the standard, you're required to have no increase in that 10-year peak discharge. And the modeling results that I reviewed for the discharge point, which is, as we heard before, way down at Patrick Brook, yep, right there. There's the modeling is showing that there's an increase of, I believe it's about 1 CFS to 6 CFS, actually, and that's cubic feet per second. So let's see, I'll give you the exact numbers. I think you might have it too. 1.9 CFS cubic feet per second to 6.09. And so, my conclusion is that there is, the project as designed would not comply with the 2002 manual or the 2017 manual. I think that's basically a summary of what I have for you. Did we hear that the applicant, Paul, you said that the 10-year post-development flow would actually be lower than the pre-development flow?
That's correct. It depends on where the modeling point is. So essentially what we said, if you look at the stormwater that leaves lot 15, that comes out of our storage, then the rate of discharge is less in post-development conditions than in pre. We had this argument with the state. If you look at the Patrick Brook discharge point, the post-development flow is greater than the pre-development flow. And the reason is the increase in size of the culvert and the lowering of the culvert. That's what essentially allows more discharge, because we have less discharge coming off lot 15, so the increase in discharge is almost completely attributed to the change in the culvert. Now, when the state, this argument was made with the state looked at it, we said, look, we're putting the bigger culvert in to try to alleviate an existing flooding condition on Dark Star. The state agreed with us that the proper point to look at the discharge was at the lot 15 boundary and not at Patrick Brook, and they issued us a stormwater discharge permit under the 2002 rules. So this has been an ongoing argument. The state so far has weighed in on our side. And it makes sense. If you increase the size of the culvert and you lower the culvert, you're going to see more flow to Patrick Brook.
Would you care for a response? Do you agree with that? No, I could just say I've done hundreds of these applications, and that's not, ultimately, I think the description is that, essentially if you're meeting, what I think the applicant's saying is if your modeling is showing that you're meeting it upstream at this analysis point, then it doesn't necessarily matter what happens at the discharge point. But ultimately, what you care about is what's going into the stream. And I think in terms of what the coverage of the modeling assessment included geographically, there wasn't the entire impact to the project that was analyzed within that development, within that modeling analysis. And the upsizing of the culvert is a result of it's a function of this project. It's a function of the stormwater that's being generated by the project, and it's a result of that. And so, the bottom line is that if at the discharge point where the water is actually entering the brook, if there's a significant increase in discharge during a flooding type storm, that's a problem. And the whole idea of that standard is that you don't create flooding. I mean, it's pretty clear to me in that, looking at it from that perspective. So right now, if I understand it, there's a detention that's occurring because of the small diameter of that pipe, and so it's slowing the flow into the Patrick Brook. The absolute magnitude may or may not be that significant off of the actual development area. That's what I'm hearing. But downstream, we do agree that the absolute volume for a degree of time will be faster and higher than the pre-development situation going into Patrick Brook.
That's what I'm seeing, correct? Yeah.
If I may, I think this is an example of no good deed goes unpunished. We were, we had an existing stormwater discharge permit that was unappealed, and because we were asked to try to solve a pre-existing problem, we're now being attacked for the solution that we brought to bear, which was to replace that culvert. So.
I think I'm going to respond to this point. We've heard, this is Jim Dumont speaking.
I'll let it go at that for the moment.
We've heard numerous times how they had this unappealed stormwater permit. Well, it turned out they were doing, for this unappealed stormwater permit, they had to make construction changes on Dark Star's land outside of the 30-foot easement. So they actually got a permit to use Dark Star's land without Dark Star's permission, to do construction on Dark Star's land without Dark Star's permission. And when we pointed it out to them and to the state, they said, oops, we have to start over. And that's why we are where we are now.
Any other questions for me, or?
Could I just comment that I recall...
Just a second, he's...
4 years ago... Okay.
Wait,
I recall 4 years ago, we had this meeting here, and Dark Star was complaining about the problems that they had with flooding on their property, that they were unwilling to take care of themselves, even though it was their property, and Hannaford had not come in at that point. So it seems like Hannaford is willing to fix Dark Star's problems that Dark Star is not willing to fix.
All right, I'm just going to take one more question because it's getting late, and we're going to continue this, so one more. He had his hand up first.
Bob Thiefels. I had a question with the other gentleman's presentation about the dewatering of the groundwater, lowering, and then the kind of the need to fill that vacuum. So the water is going to be flowing and possibly eroding underneath, if I understand this right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
It's
so,
called piping.
so if that piping goes on over time, would there be a possibility for the tanks, the position of the underground tanks to shift and that whole mechanized system begin over time to fail? And would that piping also over time possibly affect the actual foundations of the building, causing structural problems in the building itself over time? These seem to be, if this is the case, I'd like to see if there is an answer to that, if it's possible. And then, that's a serious issue if there is that piping can cause structural failure either in the tanks or the foundation of the building itself.
Okay.
I would clarify my position. I cannot speak to the geotechnical relationship between, piping, what I was talking about relative to the canal and the foundation of the building, or in fact the ongoing stability or placement of the stormwater chambers. I'm talking about the seepage that's taking place from the canal and associated with the groundwater system beneath the canal, and the increased gradient, increased velocity of flow of the groundwater within that system, and it results in essentially internal erosion and the creation of piping or pipe-shaped voids that can result in failure, whether it be catastrophic or just a progressive failure of the canal. My comments relate to the canal, and,
Okay,
and
thank you.
specifically the sand lens that emanates from it, as well as the groundwater system beneath it. I can't comment about the question that I'm being asked.
Okay, thank you.
Dennis, can I ask a procedural question? If you close, are you going to be discussing stormwater, groundwater?
We're not gonna, I'm gonna make a motion, I'm gonna keep it open.
Are you going to keep going now?
No.
That's what I'm asking. When you open again, are you going to, you're not closing?
I'm just gonna
keep
continue
going
it.
on Stormwater, groundwater.
I mean, I'm gonna make a motion to do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have other things that we gotta go over, so I'm gonna make a motion to keep the subdivision and site plan application open and continue it to May 15th.
And all issues remain open.
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Clarification, does that mean we need to bring all of our experts back for stormwater and so forth? I thought we were wrapping stormwater up today into this traffic next time.
I personally don't think they need to be here. If something arises, we can let you know. But from my perspective, we've heard the testimony, but as things sugar off, it's possible we may want clarification, invite clarification on a point, but I don't personally require it. Speaking just for myself.
I agree. Thank you.
If your engineer wants to address any of the issues that have come up, you're welcome to provide that next time. If your engineer wants to address any of the concerns that were brought up by the expert testimony we just heard, you're welcome to.
Either personally or written.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't have to be present.
Doesn't have to be present.
And the same with clarification, right?
Yeah.
All right, move to other business.
Do we have only those two decisions?
Yeah, there's,
Two decisions, and there was one additional small thing I just wanted to confirm.
Are you not able to participate in those two decisions?
I am not able to participate.
So maybe Dennis, we could do that small thing first.
yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to just make sure that our zoning administrator
I'm
happened
having
to...
trouble hearing you.
All right, I'll wait till a few more people...
No, let's try and do it because it may take a while to clear out.
Yes, or just simply ask if people can
Can the
allow us to
conversations occur in
finish.
the hall,
Thank you,
please?
Paul, for coming.
Greg, I wasn't around for the two decisions.
No, I get that. I understand.
Yeah,
you
just
wanna
just
get out.
wanted to make sure that you received the email from the zoning administrator about the minor site plan amendment to the forest property on Carmer Street, the little bump out that they're proposing.
Oh, yeah.
Did you receive the email from the zoning administrator?
I did.
You did?
I did, I had no problem.
No, I don't remember. What was it?
Yeah, I did see it.
I see 8 emails that I haven't answered yet, so.
Yeah, I did.
I just wanted to know if you had, I mean, it seems like a very minor thing, and just wanted to make sure that when you saw it, and if you had any concerns or whatever, I mean, it's pretty innocuous, but it's something that comes to you and just wants to make sure that, you know, you're aware of it.
So.
Something I like to do at the following meeting.
The protocol and our regulations grants the zoning administrator the power to approve minor site plan revisions. Frost Beer Works came in and said, we'd like to put a minor addition on the building. and the zoning administrator deemed that a minor site plan revision and approved it. And the regulations call for you to be notified that she's made that decision. You've been notified.
All right, just wanted to make sure on that. Thank you.
So this is in addition to the addition?
No, this is in addition to the main building in a different location from the last time they were before you.
And where is it? It sticks out front? It sticks out the parking lot side?
No, east side, other side.
The side facing the vet clinic?
Really?
Yeah.
There's enough land there to put?
Yeah.
Yeah, the addition is literally 6 feet
Out and by.
6 feet deep by 20 feet in length, so
It's all, of course, within the stream buffer.
it is not.
Yeah, I didn't want to ask.
So I see there's a commentary here that it just sounds like due diligence here, that no increase in visual or noise. I know we have a difficult maybe noise, but it's HVAC materials. Is there any concern? We don't have any?
We don't have any concerns over the HVAC, no.
As a matter of fact, there's a positive for the fact it's going to be internal.
They still make the wrong beer, but that's not within my purview.
And they're just, they're just going to be more efficient at it, I guess, So no new traffic?
That was the determination, yes.
Yeah.
Some additional processing, but no new traffic.
So the only point of this is just for us to, if we didn't think it was minor, to say something.
Yeah, the regulations anticipate a 15-day appeal period. It would be odd for the Development Review Board to appeal a zoning administrator action, but you could.
Okay.
Well, can I clarify how many people have received this or not? Because we can't take action if we don't have a majority on this.
Came in April 10th.
Well, I mean, I'm hearing some people say they didn't have a chance to review it.
I read over.
I'm comfortable hearing I'm supported by the staff to reinforce what looks apparent.
Okay, sounds like we have a majority or unanimity in agreement with the staff decision, so we're not overriding you.
Yeah, and there's no action necessary. It's just,
We have veto authority, I gather.
You don't. You have the ability to appeal the zoning administrator's decision like anybody else in town, but the way this process works is she issues the decision and then she notifies abutters and says, you have 15 days to appeal, and you are like an abutter. She is notifying you.
All right, so this isn't like a boundary line adjustment where we actually have to approve it.
Yeah, there's no action for
Okay.
you to take. It's
All
just
right.
Mitch is doing his due diligence by making sure that it was discussed and you knew about it.
All right, we'll move on to Jade Jenny and Daniel Horn.
In which case I shall recuse myself since
Which is the,
I didn't take part in this.
Subdivision amendment for the 31-acre parcel. You can't do either?
I can't do either. They were both handled last week, or last meeting, right? Okay, which I was not here.
the only comment is you have an extra "the" in the order under the driveway part.
I'm sorry, it's hard.
Sorry.
Get rid of the extra
You have an extra "the" on one of the orders. Hold on, I'll tell you what it is. Prior to the construction of the proposed driveway.
You know which number that is?
Yeah, 5.
Order number 5.
Prior to any, the fourth word is "the" and should be knocked out.
I guess.
Prior to any construction of the proposed driveway.
Or you can take the "any" out, whichever you would like to do, but you can't have both of them.
Prior to, actually, it's a good point. Prior to,
I would take the.
say knock out the "any."
Yes, I would take the "any" out, yes.
Take the "any" out, leave the "the."
Yep.
Good idea. Okay.
Anybody have anything else?
I do not.
Nope, that
Move to
looks,
approve as amended?
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next one's Prindle Baldwin.
That was Hollenbeek.
LLC,
Oh, yeah,
CO.
yeah.
Kira.
Got it. Okay. This is for the sketch plan.
Yeah.
This is a two-step process?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Minor, yep.
I would move to approve that.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that's been approved as is?
Yep, as is.
Thank you.
Any news and announcements?
I'm like still going back. So did we assign all of, I know I'm behind the times, I was still reading. Did we assign all of the dwelling units?
No, that's one of the orders for them to
Oh, okay,
for them
okay.
to propose it.
I didn't get there.
Yep,
That's where I was.
yep,
Okay,
yep,
sorry.
yep,
Fine, thank you.
yep.
That's it.
I don't think so. I think what I failed to mention in the hearing was that the Supreme Court reversed your approval, and that's why they're back here. The Supreme Court remanded the appeal on the Act 250 approval to the Environmental Division, and that trial was supposed to take place at the end of May. But just at the beginning of just yesterday, sorry, today's Tuesday, yesterday, the court granted Hannaford's motion to postpone that trial. So it doesn't matter very much from your standpoint, but it's related. So I thought you should know that all the parties agreed that any decision you make is going to be appealed to the Environmental Division, and Hannaford and Jim Dumont agreed that it would be in everyone's interest to have a consolidated appeal of everything, both the Act 250 permit, the stormwater permit that's on appeal, your eventual decisions on these two applications, as well as something called a water quality certification that A&R is expected to issue shortly, which is also expected to be appealed. So just know that that's been postponed, that there hasn't been a date set, but it's going to wait on you.
So I would like to get an opinion from our attorney on the Downs, Raikkonen, Martin, Christopher Roy set of arguments, because the amount of review that we have to do as a new application is significantly more, because we have a number of new people on the board, and all those issues, of the public accommodation and all that stuff. If those are we're going to go through those all again, we need to know about that. We need to decide about that. We should decide on that next meeting.
So I think we talked about at your May 1st meeting having a closed session where you talk about that and see if you can come to some agreement amongst yourselves. I'll reiterate what I said during the review. Our attorney saw Mr. Roy's letter today, and his response was, both attorneys are making good legal points. I stand by my revised April 10th opinion, which is you should proceed with a full site plan review.
He has had time to read this and digest this?
And he's been talking with both Jim Dumont and Chris Roy throughout this whole process, and they've been trying to convince each other. And Mr. Roy's letter is something that you should read. Mm-hmm. It's not news to our attorney. He's very familiar with the arguments being made. And again, he says he stands by his opinion.
His revised opinion.
As far as the town goes and their desire to increase our wastewater, and I haven't followed up with where the select board is on that. And are we having new phosphorus recommendations at a town level, and will those impact anything because they're newer rather than older?
So the permit for our wastewater system was expired. All wastewater treatment facilities in the Champlain watershed were expired, and they're all being renewed incrementally. Ours was one of the first ones to be looked at. That permit was issued by the state.
Okay.
It did contain a more rigorous phosphorus level.
Okay.
We are already meeting that lower level.
Okay.
In part because we're not at capacity. We're only at about 60% or so capacity of what we're permitted to flow. As we flow more wastewater flow, we will start to bump up against that limit. But in the world of appeals, Conservation Law Foundation has appealed the state's issuance of that wastewater permit, not just ours, but others as well. And
Saying they want more stringent?
I don't know I don't really know the substance of their appeal. So our town's wastewater permit from the state is
And is the town
under
wastewater
litigation.
different than stormwater? Right, that's what I'm
Correct.
asking.
Yeah.
Do
Two
they
different
Do
things.
they monitor our stormwater phosphorus, or is it just
No,
wastewater? Is that part of our
there
permit?
is some monitoring that happens on that front, and the workshop that happened here last week talked about that some. At this point, we're not impaired for phosphorus, Patrick Brook and the La Platte. We have some levels of concern with sediment and E. coli, but not phosphorus at the moment.
Okay, that's what I wondered, if that was going to impact, if we have more questions.
It wouldn't impact this application.
If we have more questions about treatment,
Because actually they've gotten their, I don't think it's even a matter of concern. I believe they've gotten their allocation from the town. regarding the use of-
Okay, no, it wasn't about that. It was just more that, or do we have more stringent phosphorus?
So we
rules
only do
coming
for
down?
wastewater disposal, not for stormwater.
Okay, okay.
Right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Adjourn. Yep, thank you. Good job.